This is Professor King again. I am going to show you how to do a couple of easy special effects that will make your final coin art look more realistic. You should add these special effects at the end. You should have a fully designed coin and do these things at the end to add a little extra dimension and texture. Do not rely on the special effects as part of your design. It's going to make it much easier for you to create a better design if you save this for the end. So, design first, special effects last. Before I begin, I want to show you what I mean by emboss and deboss. An emboss is the illusion that something is raised up off the surface. A deboss is the illusion that it is impressed down into the surface. You create an emboss by creating a highlight to the top and a shadow at the bottom. And you do the inverse for a deboss. If something is impressed down, the shadow will be at the top and the highlight will be at the bottom. The words emboss and deboss and the sextagon on the right both use the exact same color as the background, so it makes for a more subtle effect. On the examples on the left, I lightened the embossed shape slightly, as if the raised area were slightly lighter, and I darkened the debossed shape slightly, as if the impressed area were slightly darker. You may opt to do a more subtle effect like this or a more pronounced effect like this. You may find that the more pronounced effect works better on a coin where we have relatively small shapes with relatively fine detail. You probably will want all the help you can get to add this dimension. So I'm going to show you a relatively easy way to do this. You will need two palettes that you probably have not used before. One is the Appearance palette, so Window, Appearance, and you also need the Graphic Styles palette, Window, Graphic Styles. Just going to open them both, put them over here. Down here I have art for one side of a dollar coin. I have decided that I'm done with the design. This is what I want my art to look like, and I have rendered it all in grayscale. I highly recommend you work this way. Create it in grayscale, and we'll add the color later when we add a metallic texture. So first, let's add some dimension. I'm going to start with my star here. Now, the way I've done this, I've used 10% black on the shapes that I want to be raised up, and I've used 50% black on the shapes that I want to be impressed. This is probably a fairly large difference in color. I may want to make this difference in color more subtle as I go. But for the time being, as I was designing, I needed that contrast to be able to see everything properly. So let's start with the star. Now, if you open the Appearance palette, you'll see that under the path for the star you have a stroke, which is none. There's no outline on this, and a fill. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate the fill. This works the same way that the Layers palette does. You can just drag something down and duplicate. I'm going to make this fill, this second fill on the object, I'm going to make this my highlight. So I'm going to make it 100% white. And I'm going to offset it. So I go to Effect, Distort and Transform, Transform, and I use the Move function to offset it. I want to turn on preview so that you can see what's happening. and I want to move it 1 point to the left and 1 point up. Now, there is a funny little glitch here that if I try to just enter a negative number, Illustrator doesn't like it. If you enter negative OP1, it just converts it to 1 point. I don't know why, it's a bug. The way around this bug is to enter 0p minus 1, and then it converts it to a negative number. So 0p minus 1, that moves my white highlight fill up 1 point and to the left 1 point. Hit OK. And I want to tweak the opacity. I'm going to make the opacity, I'm going to set it to lighten, and I'm going to set it to about 70%. So that way it is a little bit more subtle. And I'm going to do the same thing all over again. I'm going to duplicate the main fill and make this a shadow. So I'm going to make that black. Oops. Alright, so I just started doing that without selecting my star. That's a very easy thing to do with the appearance palette. It will let you work to your heart's content with no selection. So just be careful. If you've ever done something and it hasn't been applied, make sure that you have the object selected. So let's start over. Let's duplicate the highlight fill, and the second fill, make it black. For the transform, I'm now going to move it so it's +1. And I'm going to set the opacity not to lighten, but to darken. I'm going to make the opacity a little bit lighter, because with a shadow, with black, a little bit goes a long way. Now, at this scale, I'm now zoomed into 400%. This really looks like 3 distinct shapes, but you'll see when we zoom back out that it actually looks like a highlight and a shadow. I'm going to go back to my main fill, which was only 10% black. I'm going to make it a little bit darker. I'm going to make it 20%, just so that I have a bit more contrast between the fill and the shadow. So let's zoom back out to 100%. Now you can see that we have this subtle dimension to the star shape. Now, what we can do, because we don't want to have to go through all of those steps every single time, we can make a graphic style. And what you do is you simply drag the object onto this graphic style palette, and now any other object, I'm going to apply this to the type. I click the type and I then click this graphic style. It suddenly has the same exact style. Now, we have a small problem here, is that 1 point of offset, which seemed fine on the star, is actually giving us like triple vision on our type. So we want a more subtle effect for the type here. And I'm just going to simply adjust. So I've clicked my type. In the appearance palette, I'm going to click the transform that I applied to edit the effect, and I'm just going to make it more subtle. I'm going to make it half a point of offset instead of an entire point of offset. And you can see that makes a big difference. Our highlight now looks like a highlight again. Let's go back and do the same thing with the shadow. And maybe I want the shadow a little bit darker now that I've made its line so subtle. So you may tweak these things to your heart's content. The general idea is the same, but the details, the difference is always in the details. And remember this negative number bug in here. That was probably some of the source of my problems just a moment ago, is that I was forgetting that this palette does not like negative numbers for some insane reason. Okay, so now I have a more subtle emboss effect on my type that is not giving me triple vision. Let me copy that into the graphic styles palette, and maybe I'll apply that to the star as well. So I get a more subtle effect. I want to do the same thing with my coin, with the background of the coin, but I'm going to do that to the stroke. You notice I have a light stroke on the outside. I'm going to give that a subtle emboss effect so it looks raised. Now the reason I'm not just applying my graphic style to this is because the graphic styles I've created have been all about the fills. And for this, I need to duplicate the stroke. So I have a second stroke, make that white, effect, distort and transform, 0p minus 0.5, 0p minus 0.5. So that gives me my highlight, and let's duplicate this again to give me a shadow. Now, the one last thing I want to do is make this $1 in the center of my star. I want to actually make that debossed. I want to make that look like it is being pressed down into the star. So I can go through all those steps again, or I can apply the graphic style and tweak it. I'm going to go through the steps again just so that I have the control I want. So fill, duplicate the fill. I'm going to make my top fill the shadow. Go back to my transform, preview it, It remembered my settings from last time. If you go to Effect, up at the top of the menu, you'll see the most recent filter you did, and it will remember your last set of values that you entered in if you go through it that way. Again, I have a super hard shadow there, which I don't really want, so I want to tweak the opacity. Set it to darken 50%. And let's do it again and create the highlight that will be on the bottom for my Deboss. Okay. I think now looking at this that perhaps my shadow on the Deboss is a bit too faint compared to the fill, so I'm going to go back in here and tweak the opacity. Darken, I'm going to make that more like 70%. Okay, great. And I can again copy this into my graphic styles palette. So now I have an emboss style and a deboss style. And when I do the other side of my coin, I can just apply them to that side of the coin. So you need to go through this once or twice, maybe 3 times, depending. You can tweak all of these things. You can tweak how much it transforms, how much it moves. You can tweak the differences in colors, the differences in opacity. And you can also control the actual base color. So this is a quick and easy deboss and emboss effect. That's it for this video. The next video I'm going to show you guys how to create an easy metallic effect.